Welcome to the second Science and Business Workshop. I want to introduce myself. I'm Tom McLagan. I work in the Dean's Office in the Faculty of Science with Dean Ray and with some of our donors and industry partners and other supporters, and I also work in the General Advancement Office. Dr. Tanner is a double grad of our chemistry program here at York University. He was the co-founder of DVS Sciences, and as president and CEO saw the company through the development and commercial launch of its first products, securing Series A financing and the subsequent establishment of its facilities both in Markham, Ontario, where the R&D and instrument production happens, and its headquarters for commercial and reagents production in Sunnyvale, California. Dr. Tanner assumed the CTO position following the merger of DVS Sciences with Fluidigm Corporation. So DVS Sciences actually became Fluidigm Canada. And so he assumed that position of CTO in 2014, retired from this post in 2015. He's currently on the board of directors of Ontario Genomics and Life Sciences Ontario. He is also, we're happy to announce, an adjunct professor here in chemistry at York University. So I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to steal his thunder, but please join me in welcoming Scott Tanner.
I want you to realize that the people you meet are the most important resource you'll ever have in your career. Your schooling is important, your family is critical. The people who teach you and lead you and mentor you and guide you, whether for good or for bad, some of these people actually taught me things not to do. But since grad school, I've kept a record of all the people who've really had the most significant impact in my life so that someday I could write my memoirs and remember who they all were. But it comes up here just as a reminder that people are the most important. It's going to come up several times in the presentation about how important that is to me in my career, and I think it should be to everyone. So the career path, how did I get here? I'm not going to go all the way back, but I will start with the 1965 Regional Science Fair. I was 12 years old. I did pretty well there. Sammy beat me. He got first, I got second, but I think Sammy's father did his project for him. But the good news about the science fair was that while I was sitting around showing my presentation, I got to reading about nuclear physics. It's what 12-year-olds do when they sit in science fairs. And that eventually led to my having a laboratory at Brock University. Brock had just started up in 1964, their physics department. I had just had an explosion in my lab at home, which was my family's laundry room, and we set fire to the room and to my father. And they decided that I should probably do my science somewhere else. And so I met a couple of really great profs at Brock who offered me a facility. In fact, I got to build my own experiments there from age 12 to about age 16, trying to do Rutherford's experiment, which you know is shooting alpha particles through gold foils and looking at nuclear structure. I gotta say that that was 4 years of fairly intense work, which taught me that science doesn't always work. If you know anything about Rutherford, he had 3 graduate students who did the work, and all of them went blind. And I now know why, because it's really hard to see what he saw, although it was true. But what it did teach me was a whole bunch of different sciences, a whole bunch of different technologies, the way to integrate stuff, and the way to try to pursue an untenable problem, and then be happy that it turned out negatively, because that sometimes happens in real life. Other things that happened, I took my undergraduate degree at York University, and there's a couple reasons for that. One of them happened to be that I was on the national gymnastics team, and York happened to be the national training center. And when I first registered at a different university, the national coach said, "Don't you really want to be a gymnast?" I went, "Yeah." So I came to York. But the other good thing was that York in the early 70s, and I understand is instituting again, had an interdisciplinary science program. And I hope, so interdisciplinary science was the blurred region between biology and chemistry and physics and biology. And I think you'll see through my career path that that interdisciplinary nature is what made my life work. Because I got to work with people who knew lots of stuff that I didn't know, but because I was trained as an interdisciplinary scientist, I could bring them all back in together. Anyway, so by third year, I realized that I should find out where the library at York was. I had a humanities project that actually made me write an essay, and I had to find a library to get a reference, which the only reason I mention that is that by the time I graduated undergrad and had spent all my time in the gymnasium, I realized I really wanted to go to grad school, and I ended up having to petition the grad school to let me in, and they were very nice. They did in fact, let me in. I spent my third year summer project working with Dieter Bohm in the Department of Chemistry, and he really enthused me so that I continued on my grad work, despite his recommendation that I don't work with him. Now, that could have been because of the problems we had when I was in third year undergraduate. Did set fire to his lab as well. Flame, oh yeah, well, you'll see that flame became an important part of my life because I was also a flame ion mass spectroscopist. So I worked with Dieter Bohm and John Goodings, working on some fundamental chemical physics stuff, using a mass spectrometer to do the work, but in those days, mass spectrometers were pretty simple little devices that were relatively unpowerful. Nearing graduation, then I had to make a decision about what I was going to do with my life, and I weighed my options on academia and industry. And academia, I had an opportunity to go to Santa Barbara, California, which would have been really nice. I decided to stay in Toronto and work with a early stage company called SciEx. I started off with an industrial postdoctoral fellowship there, and saw that company from its early stage up to its significant success about 25 years later. So I'd only intended to stay for 2 years. The plan was work with a small company for 2 years, then I'd work for a big company for 2 years, and I'd start my own company. Right. Well, it didn't work. I stayed for 25 years, and the reason I stayed there was because the people were so darn good. They had an exquisitely fabulous group of scientists who were not only great scientists, but they're also great people. So a lot of their names end up on my list of important people. The intent of my work originally was I'd be working on a plasma source mass spectrometer. Because I did flame ion mass spectrometry, I knew how to sample a high temperature flame. I thought I did. You know, the flame I was working on was like a 1500 degree acetylene oxygen flame. Well, the microwave-induced plasma was maybe 3,000 degrees. And I was supposed to work on that. That eventually evolved into an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer, which is actually about a 7,000 degree plasma. It's more like the surface of the sun. It's a really cool, really hot device. However, despite all my expertise in that, and this is an important point, all the expertise you learned in grad school may not actually be what drives your future career. It taught you to think, it taught you to work with people, to accept new ideas, but I actually got set aside for 6 months looking at other technologies that SciEx at the time was interested in. And that 6 months actually turned into 5 years. And I did a lot of really interesting things in those years, built a lot of mass spec devices, did a lot of mass spec sampling. So we'd build new technologies, we'd apply them, we'd take them into the field, try to convince somebody that they wanted to buy it. Right. Things like monitoring emissions from a train derailment. We had one in Mississauga. It was the largest at that time evacuation of citizens at any point. There's 275,000 people got moved when a train crashed and spilled some chlorine. We drove our mass spectrometer around, told them where the plume was flowing, and then they evacuated those people and we let them back in when we finished. This happened to be in Medonte up north of Barrie, and I got a call at 3 in the morning saying there's a train crash. I went, hey, we haven't sold an instrument in 2 years. We can go up here and sell another instrument, right? So jumped in the car and drove up there, and the first thing I did was run along the tracks taking pictures until the police caught me and sent me back to the lab to actually do the measurements on the hydrofluoric acid that was leaking out of that train. Other interesting things, working in a site that I can't specify in 1981. This is when I learned that I was disposable.